If healthy eating began with more flavor, simple prep, and kitchen confidence, would you change how you eat? Hi, I'm Marianne Smith Edge, registered dietitian and host of Rooted Restless, and welcome back to this episode. Today, I am so pleased to have a friend and a colleague to really talk about adding flavor, fun to food. Amy Myrdal Miller, a registered dietitian, a North Dakota farm girl, and a California-based culinary and food and nutrition expert. Amy has, over the years, been able to blend her farm background with her culinary and often humorous insights and communications in the food and nutrition world. So, Amy, thank you so much for taking time and joining us from Sacramento today to really kind of talk about that blend of food, flavor, and farm. And even though you and I both grew up on farms, growing up in North Dakota is a little different than Kentucky. So I think it's always good to kind of get an insight on how did your farm background in North Dakota really influence who you are today?
Oh, gosh, Marianne, first of all, it's delightful to be with you here today. I know that as farmers' daughters, we share so many traits. We share so many values. And I can tell you, when I was growing up on the farm in North Dakota, as the youngest of 5 kids, I didn't have much of a voice. I sat there as the youngest child, listening intently to what everybody else was doing, wanting to mimic my older siblings and wanting to make sure I followed, the guidance of my parents. The worst thing you could do as a Myrdal was disappoint your parents. And so much of our conversations around our dinner and supper table focused on the weather. So I can tell you today as a Californian, I am delighted that it is raining. We're supposed to get 1.35 inches here in Carmichael, which is awesome because we know California is prone to drought. So we're filling up our reservoirs and working on snowpack. So we were obsessed with weather on the farm. We were obsessed with what we were eating. My mom went through a food renaissance in the late 60s before I was born and decided that she didn't want to have any processed foods on her table. She wanted everything to come from the farm. And can you imagine making that switch when you already had 4 kids and you decided that you were going to do things like take the wheat that your husband was growing, clean it by hand to clean out things, like the chaff and ergot, take honey from the bees kept on the farm to use as your sweetener, use the cream from the dairy cows to make butter. I mean, I don't know where she got this energy, but she did. So I had this, very kind of, it was a very different food experience compared to my classmates. I can remember a boy named Troy. I'm giggling because I had a huge crush on him. A boy named Troy whose mom sent him to school each day with a Jell-O pudding pack. And I can remember the sound of that lid being pulled back and him putting the spoon into taking those bites of pudding. And I just thought that was magical. So I didn't know back then how great my mom was setting me up for feeling excited about food and flavor and culinary confidence and being really excited about ingredients.
I have to laugh. I grew up listening to the weather radio. So, to your point, I grew up on a dairy farm, and so it was always weather in regards to cutting hay, especially in the summer. So to this day, when people said, I had no idea what the weather was going to be when I travel, I'm like, what do you mean didn't have any idea? Just look at it. Because I am also pretty obsessed with that. And I agree with you is that my mother wasn't quite that Renaissance, but raising chickens and having the dairy and fruits and vegetables, I kind of thought it was not so trendy because I'm like, can't we buy food from the store like everybody else? And here we are. So with that background, though, and as you said, your mother was a Renaissance, and so obviously you learned to cook at that age. But I think what's so wonderful is how you've been able to blend the nutrition piece with the culinary piece. And we know that some of our colleagues don't actually cook, but I think our paths, or at least I first knew of you more when you worked with the CIA, and I have to laugh so people will know the CIA in our world is the Culinary Institute of America, and I was so loved that because I've had the opportunity of doing not only educational but like week-long boot camps. So I've always laughed and said I've been a chef wannabe at times. So I just really want to hear more of like some of your experiences of kind of the insight and building on that food and flavor. Maybe what are some cooking tips and hacks that you've learned along the way that really can help all of us?
I want to go back a little bit before I was working with Chefs Not Spies at the CIA. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 7. In fact, just a few days ago was my 48th anniversary of the diagnosis. And that's what really got me interested in what my mom was doing in the kitchen. She invited me in. I can remember my first cookbook was the Betty Crocker Boys and Girls Cookbook. First thing I made was a muffin recipe where you hid a little dollop of jam in the center of the muffin dough. And when you opened it up, you popped it open, there was a little bit of jam. That jam was crabapple jelly from my mom's crabapple tree. My mom gave me opportunities to be in the kitchen with her. And then very quickly, my mom left the kitchen and was like, oh, it is delightful that my youngest daughter wants to take over my kitchen. She can have it. My mom retreated to the garden. So, I felt very comfortable in kitchens when I had roommates in college who didn't know even, how to make pasta. I was the one that said, here's how you do it. And I ended up cooking for roommates through college. I cooked at a fraternity house for 1 year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a beast of a job. It paid great. It was hard work. And the Delta girls were very rude to me in organic chemistry. Yeah, so by the time I got to the Culinary Institute of America, it was a really delightful happenstance situation. They were looking for a chef with a journalism degree, and I sold them on a dietitian who was good at marketing and nutrition communications. And I worked there for 14 years. During that time, I started out as a consultant on a special project. They liked me. They hired me. I worked for 7 years on staff. I got to work as my home base in the Napa Valley, but I also worked at a Singapore campus, San Antonio, Texas, and the main campus in Hyde Park, New York. I was exposed to a lot of faculty members who were trained in traditional French cuisine and techniques, but I also got to work on conferences and leadership retreats with chefs from all over the world. And many of those chefs had a very significant and positive impact on me. Chef John Ash here in Northern California would always come and sit right next to me at conferences and whisper in my ear, sometimes with praise for his colleagues on stage, sometimes with snipey little comments that would make me giggle inappropriately. Chef Ileana de la Vega, who runs a phenomenal restaurant called El Naranjo in Austin, Texas, with her husband. Chef Ileana is from Mexico City, but her grandmother was from Oaxaca. And she was and still is today obsessed with ingredient education and the differences in regional cuisine around Mexico. She was the first chef who really ingrained in me that when we say Chinese cuisine or Italian cuisine or Mexican cuisine, she said, that's ridiculous. She said, what's the cuisine of North Dakota where you grew up? It's different from where you live now. So, I have so many amazing friends out there who, respected me as a dietitian and also wanted to bring me along with their culinary insights and expertise. I will say, Marianne, it was not an easy place to work.
I can believe that.
Yeah. The chef culture was very male driven, and the chef love of a dietitian wasn't always there. Respect wasn't always there. So I tried to lead with questions and curiosity focused on flavor. And then that really helped me develop, my palate, my techniques, my authority in that area.
So I love your story, and I would say that it's a pretty fast fast-paced environment and just a little bit of experience that I've had. And I don't think I would tell people I'd go to these boot camps and I go, oh, no, you don't realize we're there at 6 a.m. in the morning and you have 2 hours to pull a product together. You get to eat, and then it looks like, oh, we have the afternoon off. No, you got to prep for the next day. So, I mean, even though that's can be, quote, exciting, I totally get where you're coming from. But so you already had a good basis for food and flavor, but maybe just a couple of insights, the fact that you've had so many interaction with different chefs, literally globally. What are some, just let's say, flavor hacks that you carry over to your, I'll say, everyday cooking, or like maybe something I'm missing, or that can really add to the flavor of our food?
You know, when we talk about flavor development, there are two things that contribute flavor, the ingredients and the techniques you use. So take something like garlic. If you peel a clove of garlic and you sniff it, it definitely smells like garlic, especially if you've trimmed off that naughty little root end. But then if you take that garlic and you mince it and you add a little salt to it and you almost like turn it into a paste on the cutting board, the aromas have just been released so powerfully because you've broken down all those cell walls and all those volatile aromatic compounds have been released. Now, if that garlic has the least bit of brown spot on it, that means that it's become really ripe and it's got more of a sweetness, almost like when you roast garlic. And I think that's the most powerful lesson I got at the CIA, going through guided tastings or building flavor profiles with these trays with 20 to 30 ingredients in little 1 ounce portion control cups, and taking, say, a raisin and eating the raisin very mindfully, then taking the raisin, dipping it in lime juice, tasting it to see how the effect of acid interplayed with the sweetness of the raisin, then taking the raisin, the lime juice, the salt. And that was the very first guided tasting I did at the CIA with Chef Bill Brewan. It was about building a mole and the complexity of a mole. But then once you build that mole, you maybe know what's in there, but you can't pinpoint it because the flavor has been so balanced and the complexity of all those compounds that create flavor have married so beautifully. Oh, this is so fun. I'm having so much fun going down memory lane with you today. So stepping back from all of that nitty-gritty detail, evaluating ingredients. I went shopping at a farmer's market recently and made a meal very simply. And I was so proud of myself. And I realized I had gotten the very best ingredients. I had paid some premium prices for things like extra virgin olive oil, and the phenomenal quality of those ingredients contributed not so much to my talent. It wasn't that, it was the ingredients I started with. So I said ingredients plus technique. So then that technique of, what's the cooking technique that you're going to choose? What's the preparation of the ingredient? I mentioned the, complete decimation of that garlic clove. Those things all have impact. And once you appreciate that and you give yourself permission to start playing with that, you can just have more and more fun with flavor development and flavor exploration.
Well, and I love your thoughts on the garlic. I think that makes sense. So before I think talking about that flavor is really moving us into kind of talking about how do we increase that flavor with fruits and vegetables. And you've taken your skill sets as well as your farm knowledge to really work in, say, the whole produce world and what we would call specialty crops. I think from probably walnuts to mushrooms and potatoes and anything that's grown in California. I think you probably had some. Your finger has touched it. So, what are some? As we both know, all this, we've always been about how do you eat healthier and fruits and vegetables. It really comes down to that. And but there seems to be this no on kind of fruits and vegetables. They surely can't taste flavorful. And we both know that's not absolute, not true, but Give us some insights on things that, as you've worked with different produce in California, where that extra zinc can really come through for some fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, you're right, Marianne. I've been completely obsessed with getting people to love more types and eat more quantity of fruits and vegetables. This started when I was in my late 20s. I got hired by Dole Food Company, and I was working for a PhD RD named Lorelei DeSogra in the nutrition department at Dole. And our program was focused on sending nutrition education materials to elementary school teachers and school nutrition directors and their teams to encourage kids to eat more, try more, enjoy more fruits and vegetables. I was the voice and personality of 53 fruit and vegetable characters for the Dole 5-A-Day team.
I can believe it. I can believe it.
Oh yeah, I mean, talk about like multiple personality disorder. One minute I was Bobby the banana, the next minute I was Randy Raspberry. And I was doing that via an email program. Kids were, for one of their, writing curriculum activities, would write emails to the characters, and then I'd have to remember what Bobby Banana said he was doing last time this kid wrote. And these were thousands and thousands of school kids all across the country. But yeah, the messages back then were focused on kids appreciating, the colors, the aromas, the fun of shopping for them with mom and dad or a caregiver in a store. Today, I've moved into, how do you prepare something so that someone eating it enjoys it more? And, my example is, when you go to a hotel banquet, you're in the ballroom and you get the option of, the chicken, salmon, or steak, but they all come with like some steamed cauliflower, broccoli, and carrots on the side. And, some people love steamed vegetables like that. Many of us love them more if they have a little garlic butter or if they've been roasted and you get some of those caramelized edges on the broccoli and cauliflower. I personally don't like cooked carrots, so it doesn't really matter what you do to them unless it's a carrot ginger soup. Then I'm all in. So I've been married now for 17 plus years, and my husband grew up with a mom who cooked with her Louisiana sensibilities, which meant vegetables weren't cooked. They were cooked and then they were cooked some more. So he's a big fan of like different textures. So he never liked mashed sweet potatoes, for example. But when I introduced him to diced roasted sweet potatoes, he loves that. So, the thinking about ways that you can get people to appreciate the colors, the aromas, the textures. I will say it's encouraging. Data from the past 10 years have shown that we Americans are snacking on more fruit. And why is that? Well, A, we know it's good for us. It's pretty convenient to grab an apple or banana. And berries are exploding as a category in retail. So people have adopted that pattern more. Vegetables are harder to get people to eat more of because if you don't like prepping or you don't know how to handle a knife or you don't like the extra time and effort, and if you don't, I say to people, that's fine. Guess what I use at least once a week? Those frozen vegetables where you microwave them in the bag they came in. It's safe. Relax about the packaging. That has been fully investigated. It's fast and efficient. And you have a vegetable. And did I mention that I don't like the steamed stuff? Yeah, guess what I do? I drizzle a little olive oil on it. I crack some fresh pepper. Sometimes I toss it with some olive oil that I've infused some garlic in or some Italian seasoning. So, yes, I add a little extra effort there, but I think those products are great. Any frozen vegetable that you can just microwave, you open up a bag of corn and you microwave that. I mean, do that. We can't be so perfect. What is that? And perfection is the enemy of good, and good is eating more fruits and vegetables. So find the form that's easy for you and choose it more often.
Well, and thank you. I think that needs to be our story. More permission that it's okay. Fresh is great, but frankly, fresh from California over in Kentucky this time of the year, is not as fresh as what I can get from frozen, is what you've just mentioned. So fresh, canned, frozen, all work in that, and just adding those added touches is what's so great. Now let's hear from Mindy Herman, registered dietitian, food and nutrition writer, and a guru on all the latest food trends.
Hi Marianne, happy February. This is the month filled with stories about chopping down cherry trees and the bright cherry red color of Valentine's Day hearts. So let's talk about cherries, specifically tart Montmorency cherries. The U.S. produces up to 150,000 tons of tart cherries each year, with about 3/4 grown in Michigan. The bright red color of tart cherries means that they're rich in naturally occurring anthocyanins. These are plant-based antioxidants that are linked to several health benefits, including sleep support, joint health, reduced inflammation, and muscle strength recovery. In the past few years, tart cherry flavor has shown up in a wide range of products, from craft beer and gummies to premium ice cream and functional drinks. You can drink tart cherry juice straight or mix it with sparkling water for a refreshing mocktail. Dried Montmorency cherries are delicious to eat too.
Now, let's return to our conversation. So let's talk about California produce. I think individuals don't really sometimes realize the magnitude of what is produced in one state, how much actually is not only supplies us across the U.S., but globally.
Yeah, I have the pleasure of working as the dietitian for California Grown. We are a federally funded entity here in California that is celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. We represent more than 400 specialty crops. So all of the fruit, all of the vegetables, the tree nuts, things like almonds, pistachios, walnuts, flowers, and herbs. So we have this great abundance of ingredients, farmers, growers, farm workers whom we represent. And we work tirelessly to help people appreciate what is produced here in what we call the Golden State, where it travels around the U.S. as well as around the world, what we also bring in from other parts of the world to keep our food system and our grocery stores and food service operations supplied with things that we want. Just this weekend, my husband and I bought 3 packages, those bigger clamshells of California strawberries for $1.97 a piece. And it's February and it's raining. And those were strawberries that were harvested outside of Oxnard, California 4 or 5 days ago. I mean, the California strawberry industry is amazing. Given, weather conditions permitting, strawberries can now be harvested in fields in California 12 months of the year. That's amazing. But then there are states like Michigan that have indoor strawberry facilities to send fresh berries, freshly picked in indoor facilities to the East Coast. So folks on the East Coast, maybe even Kentucky, you guys might get some of those.
We probably do.
Indoor berries. So I think we have to appreciate all the ways that farms and farmers are creating systems to provide food for us. It's, I love the open field model that I grew up with, 10,000 acres in Northeast North Dakota. Wow, that's fun. And it's really fun to see the massive size of equipment where you can stand inside the well of a tire. That's exciting for a girl who likes big hair and big farm equipment. I also love driving by Gotham Greens outside of Davis, California, where I went to college, and seeing their Gotham grow houses where they're lit up 24/7, because they're growing indoor lettuce production there. And that lettuce is so good. They breed for those lettuces. They're different than the ones grown in open fields. Anyway, I am full on geeking out, Marianne.
No, I think that's what's so great. Last week I talked with a total ag guy, really talking about, of course, land use and reality, and we see some land erosion from availability, but as he mentioned, productivity. But we also know kind of the whole indoor ag environment is needs to grow. I remember my trip in probably 6, 7 years ago, went to Japan and on a fast train through Japan and seeing greenhouses, because that's where they're growing strawberries, because that's the only option it is. It's not like they have a lot of available land to grow the fields that you're talking about. So talking about all your love for food and flavor, and I just happen to have this little cookbook over here that is, I know, near and dear to your heart. It is February is Heart Month, and so Amy is a co-author on the latest edition of Cooking a la Heart, which is really a whole collection of recipes that are full of flavor and also a great way to introduce heart health recipes. People would say anybody can write a recipe book, and maybe that's so, but not so when you come to a recipe book of this nature, because of really looking at flavors and nutrient content and obviously preparation. So just love to hear your experience and maybe highlight, like, what's a favorite recipe or from what we can really gain from Cooking a la Heart.
Cooking a la Heart just celebrated her third birthday earlier this month. She was published on February 7th, 2023, but as you mentioned, this is the fourth edition. Cooking a la Heart started in the mid-1980s as part of a NIH-funded research study looking at community interventions to reduce risk of heart disease in Minneapolis, Mankato, and Moorhead, Minnesota. And my co-author, Linda, was one of the first dietitians to work on this project. She then bought the rights to the book from the Minnesota Heart Foundation and did the second and third editions. And then she sold her company. She had a publishing company called Apple Tree Press. She was going to try to retire. The publishers who bought rights to Cooking a la Heart, called The Experiment, said, "We think it should be updated and re-released." And they gave her 30 days to do it.
Oh my gosh.
It had last been done in 2006. And Linda said, "Okay, I just need to update the dietary guidance and just look at a few other things." And then she had the realization that, oh dear, this book needs a major updating for today's cooks and kitchens. So she invited me to work with her. We spent 22 months working on it. And from the original book, I think this version has retained something like 35 of the original recipes. There's one called Berries with Cannoli Cream that has been one of the top recipes since day one. And, we went through and we created new entire sections like breakfast and brunch recipes. We had a section for tacos, burgers, handhelds. It was Zoom meetings every single week, writing and rewriting, writing a recipe on paper, going and shopping for the ingredients, testing it in the kitchen, retesting. In one of the show notes, you'd said, "Did you really try every recipe?" No, Marianne, I did not. Linda created about 60% of the recipes. I did the remaining recipes. I also wrote the opening chapters, the chapter intros for each section. I did look at every recipe. I kind of served as our managing editor as we moved through the process of preparing the manuscript. Today, my favorite recipes, there's chicken chili verde. I love that. I love the colors. I love the flavors. There's the baked ricotta dish, which is one of the easiest appetizers to bring to a party. I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite child. I think I'm obsessed with chicken chili verde right now because I'm obsessed with soups in our cool, rainy weather here in California. But I am so proud of that cookbook. I cringe when somebody thinks that it's a book for somebody like, oh, it's for people with heart disease. No, it's for all of us who have a heart and who care about it.
Exactly.
And it's for anybody who wants to eat well and enjoy great food. You do have to like to cook. I mean, Cooking a la Heart is about cooking. There aren't many recipes in it that are kind of assembling things, but they're not hard recipes. Some have more ingredients, some take a little more time, but many of them, we have like a section on smoothies. If you have a blender, you can make a smoothie. Period. End of story. So, I'm very proud of it. I love the book. It's so fun seeing it on your screen. I mean, I feel like I'm looking at my baby. I don't have kids, but 22 months of gestation, and there she is.
Well, many years ago, I wrote a consulting book. Not as fun, doing that, but I can tell about babies. And maybe Scott didn't say this, but my husband said umpteen years ago. He goes, "Well, just tell people this is the last book his first wife will ever write." So maybe it's time, after all, I can do something different, in that regard. But it is a great book, and thanks for the insight on some of those recipes. I will try. So, thinking about you've kind of expressed your food philosophy, but I think if we can't get people excited about trying new flavors after listening to this, it's like, what will it take? But I'm sure your urban spice cabinet is even larger than mine, but at the same time, we probably have larger ones than maybe typical. So you really talked about garlic and you talked about olive oil. So maybe what's essentials? What would be just a few if I really want to start with experimenting and at making my frozen vegetables better? What do I need?
Well, okay, I'm going to put on my dietitian hat, like the hardcore dietitian hat. One of the biggest challenges globally for people's nutrient intake is too much sodium and increasing blood pressure as we age. So I encourage everybody to buy Diamond Crystal kosher salt. I'm not a spokesperson. I'm not paid by that brand. I promote it because Diamond Crystal is a salt where the crystals are diamond shaped. They're hollow on the inside. And that means that a teaspoon of Diamond Crystal kosher salt weighs 60% less than regular table salt, which means it has 60% less sodium per measure. You can use it the exact same way. It has this very clean salt flavor, and that's one of the easiest ways to bring down sodium in your cooking. Diamond Crystal Kosher Salt. I really wish every time I said it, I got a nickel. The other thing that I recommend is buy black pepper corns and a pepper grinder and freshly grind your black pepper. Now, if that's all the seasoning that you like, just salt and pepper, fine. That's great. The next thing that most people have are those little packets that you get with pizza of red pepper flakes. Pepper flakes have a compound called capsaicin that has this tingly sensation on our tongue as the capsaicin interacts with our taste buds. Adding a little bit of heat to a lot of recipes starts to wake up the flavor. The next thing I'd say is some fresh citrus. Little squeeze of orange if you're making something like a pork dish. Lemon works almost on everything. I use lemon zest in so many dishes now. Like if you take a Caesar salad dressing from your local grocery store or the packet that comes with the salad kit, add in a little lemon zest, and all of a sudden your Caesar salad has been elevated to the next level of deliciousness. And then from there, we have a whole chapter on seasonings and spice blends. Marianne, you would like fall on the floor laughing if you saw my kitchen, because now many years after being done writing the manuscript, I still have hundreds of bottles.
I'm sure you do.
And people go, "Oh, she likes cooking," and they give them to me. And I go, "Oh God, no, no, no. I'm trying to use up my supply from the cookbook." And they don't last forever. So, okay, back to that issue of lasting forever. Buy them whole if you can. Grind them. I use my coffee grinder, my little tabletop coffee grinder to grind spices. I then clean it with rice, like dry rice, just pulse that, and that cleans out those flavors. So the next time you grind coffee, it doesn't taste like whatever spice you were grinding. And then, like my favorite, just store-bought Italian seasoning. I like a Mediterranean flavor profile. I love cardamom. I grew up in an Icelandic community. I can put cardamom in yogurt every morning. Again, with a little bit of lemon zest. I sweeten it with a little equal because I have type 1. And, yeah, there are certain things that I do because I love the flavors. But the easy ones that you can do, best salt, diamond crystal, freshly ground black pepper, a little bit of citrus to add a little acid for flavor balance. All of a sudden, your food starts to become a little more interesting, a little more delicious.
Well, I'm already hungry, just what you've talked about, but it's so true. And so the good news, I can say check, because I totally agree with you on the diamond crystal. In fact, I used to work with a company on supplements that actually was bought by Diamond Crystal years and years ago. So I got to see all the salt variations and stuff at one time, and it was it really drives home the point that you talked about, why kosher salt is recommended so many times. It's not they're trying to sell the brand, it's just that you get the flavor without so much of the sodium in that aspect. So, well, obviously, Amy, we could talk for hours, but to wrap it up, is there any final food philosophy or fun insight that you've learned along the way in your career that we all can benefit from?
So, as someone who's had type 1 diabetes for as long as I can remember, I've gotten lots of advice from people, most of it attached to a finger wagging at me. You can't eat that. You shouldn't eat that. Did you count your grapes? These are things that made me nutso as a little kid. 15 grapes was one fruit serving. Oh my God, what if they're giant grapes? What do I do then? So anyway, I think that everybody just needs to relax a little bit. People get a little nutso about food and lifestyle diets. Relax and think about the one thing you can do today that's going to be a better for you choice. Is that having fruit for a snack? Is that adding a vegetable to your evening meal? Is that drinking your first morning cup of coffee in quiet solitude versus watching the news and starting that stress cycle of what's happening now? So I don't have advice that's focused on being perfect. I have advice focused on being you and being more mindful.
Well, that's the best. And I think the key is in all this conversation of sometimes what not to eat. Hopefully we've walked away today. It's about a permission of what to eat. But the key is how we add so much flavor to food. And essentially it can be fun as well. So Amy, thank you. It's always fun to chat with you. And here's to our health and cooking a la heart.
Cheers, Marianne.
As we wrap up February, it's been about Heart Month, about Valentine's Day, but the reality is, how do we take care of our heart every day? And hopefully you've gained some insights about what to add flavor to our food. The key here is understanding some prep and a little more kitchen confidence can really improve what's on our plate. Flavor can add a lot to our fruits and vegetables or whatever we eat. So try a little, whether it's salt, pepper, or a lot of seasonings, or lemon zest, as Amy mentioned. Just a little extra can always make our food taste good. And after all, food has flavor. It also adds to our enjoyment. Here's to our health. Thank you for listening, Rooted and Restless. It's all about digging deeper into the behind the scenes about food, agriculture, and nutrition. Because after all, every food has a story, and sometimes it's not as simple as it seems. Subscribe to Rooted and Restless wherever you listen to podcasts or find us on YouTube.